Well, it's time now for Perspective. Today's guest is the director of the Europe in the World program at Egmont and the author of This Is Not a New World Order. Sven Biscop, thank you very much for joining us on France 24. I'd like to start with the blurb of your new book, which reads, "We've been living in the same multipolar world for more than 3 decades. Europeans are only now again getting used to how such a world of great powers works. In the process, the European Union has rediscovered the importance of geopolitics." Tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Lots of people like to say that everything is new, but actually, if you look at the history of world politics, you see that the mechanics of it hasn't changed. We seem to be surprised that, for example, China is there as a great power, pursuing their interest and, of course, competing with us. But historically speaking, that is strictly normal. And it's important that you know that, because it means that, our strategy cannot aim at making China disappear, making China small again. That will not happen. So it seems perhaps like an academic question, getting this understanding right, but it has real implications for policy, I think.
And you mentioned China. I think, we can't ignore the European elections that are happening next week. There's lots of major challenges and issues of this vote. One of them will be how the European Union can become more competitive in general, but also counter competition from China. How do you think the bloc can go about that?
I think we have set out the right policy line, what the EU now calls de-risking, basically meaning that we manage our dependencies, and we have to be willing to be assertive. When another player, including China, does not play by the rules of the economic game, we have to stand firm. But the overall aim, of course, remains to keep everybody within the rules of the global economic game, not to see the world split up in rival blocs. So it's a fine line that we have to tread. And obviously a lot depends also on China itself, which often acts too assertively for its own good.
Well, then how can we say conflict is affecting Europe and the European elections, particularly the war in Ukraine?
The war in Ukraine is really what made us discover the importance of geopolitics, and because we saw Ukraine as a buffer state in between us and Russia, but Russia said, no, this is part of our sphere of influence, and went to war to secure it. Now, by making Ukraine a candidate for EU membership, it had actually become a border state. Ukraine is now the border of Europe, and this means that we have to stick by it, whatever happens. And so the new European Commission, the new European Parliament, will really have to find a resolve to commit any more resources, because the reality is we are not standing by Ukraine. We are not arming them sufficiently to survive.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, we've seen Zelensky in the past couple of days touring Europe, urging leaders not to let the war in Ukraine slip down the global agenda. Do you think that war fatigue is inevitable?
I don't think it is inevitable, and certainly in the countries of Central and Eastern Europe, people are much more aware that there is threats, because if we do not block Russia in Ukraine, Russia will look for other targets, specifically Moldova and Georgia. So it really is in everybody's interest that we take action now. Again, Ukraine will be a member of the European Union, so this means that whatever happens, we cannot abandon it anymore.
And the far right across Europe is set to make inroads in this election. How would a larger presence of these parties change policy of the bloc?
It is very counterintuitive indeed that many of these far-right parties are extremely nationalistic, but at the same time they allow themselves to be instrumentalized as agents of hostile powers such as Russia. And so in a way they act as traitors, to put it bluntly. So yes, this is a big challenge, but I do think that at the level of the European Parliament, the results across the member states will even themselves out, and there will be a workable majority of the democratic parties. But in some individual member states, we already have very far right-wing populists in power, and that creates difficulties.
Right, and what about, the far right has tried to capitalize on mass farmers' protests that we saw at the beginning of this year. They've, the bloc also faces challenges of how to balance addressing these demands and going forward with the green energy transition. How do you see this playing out?
Clearly, we should not forget that the European peace project has two dimensions. So on the one hand, of course, we should defend our sovereignty and that of our partners and candidate states against external aggressions. But the other half of the European peace project is our own way of life, which is basically the welfare state. So there's no point in saying cut back on the welfare state to invest on defense, because it's precisely the welfare state that you are defending. So here too, the next Commission and Parliament will have to find the right balance between providing for our own citizens internally, but making sure that we defend ourselves against these external threats. Both are core tasks, I would say.
And I also want to talk about the youth vote, because millions more are set to vote in these European elections. I believe about 5 million in Germany, some 4 million in France. How might their voice change the outcome of this vote?
Strikes me when I teach for my own students that in the end they remain idealistic, and so that's always a reason for optimism. I would say the difficulty for us is that the founding myth or the founding story of the EU as a project that keeps the peace among members has become too self-evident, maybe. But I would hope that all the external threats that we see, notably Russia's war against Ukraine, make people understand again, including people who vote for the first time, how vitally important European integration really is. And because let's face it, if all our countries would be facing the Russian invasion alone, I doubt whether anybody would do anything for Ukraine. But because we are a union and because we are also members of NATO, we can confidently support Ukraine.
All right, well, we'll have to see what comes of that vote next week. Sven Biscop, thank you very much for joining us. Again, a reminder that your book is called This Is Not a New World Order. We've got it on the screen up here. Thank you very much.